Imagine being an 11-year-old boy.
Mm-hmm.
Your father, who's this respected doctor, takes you into the woods. You spend the whole afternoon just singing your favorite childhood songs.
Right.
You're enjoying what feels
Wonderful.
like this perfectly normal, happy day. But then the very next morning, your father walks into his office and, well, he shoots himself.
It's just horrifying.
It really is.
Mm.
And you're there watching his bloody uniform burn in the family fireplace. The trauma of that sudden violence is so profound that for the next 9 years, you absolutely refuse to eat a single meal at home.
Wow. 9 years.
9 whole years, because you're absolutely convinced that your own mother is trying to poison you.
That is just a shattered reality.
Exactly. And why? Because your father was a Nazi. The year is 1945, the regime is completely collapsing, and the terrifying reality of what your family was involved in is just, well, it's destroyed your entire world.
Yeah, and today, for our deep dive, we are really dissecting the anatomy of a societal collapse.
We are. Welcome to the deep dive, everyone. We have a very specific mission for you today.
We really do.
We are taking a piece of primary historical source material. It's this detailed text documenting the rise of Nazism and the Holocaust.
Right, and we're going to read through it section by section, basically word for word.
But we aren't just reading it. We are going to tear it apart, analyze the psychology behind it, and try to understand exactly how a nation of millions descended into an unspeakable nightmare.
Because the human mind naturally wants to categorize history as this neat timeline of distant events.
Right, like it's just stuff that happened a long time ago.
Exactly. But this text forces us to look at the mass psychology, the political manipulation, and the slow, methodical erosion of human rights.
Yeah.
It demands that we understand the why and the how.
Yeah, it's not just a textbook timeline. And the text actually opens with the story I just described about the boy.
It does, yeah.
It begins not at the start of Hitler's rise, but at the bitter, bloody end. Let me read this first part exactly as it's written in the source.
Go for it.
Quote, "In the spring of 1945, a little 11-year-old German boy called Helmuth was lying in bed when he overheard his parents discussing something in serious tones.
Mm-hmm.
His father, a prominent physician, deliberated with his wife whether the time had come to kill the entire family or if he should commit suicide alone.
Wow. Just casual conversation about killing the family.
His father spoke about his fear of revenge, saying, 'Now the Allies will do to us what we did to the crippled and Jews.'
Right.
The next day, he took Helmuth to the woods, where they spent their last happy time together, singing old children's songs.
So eerie.
Later, Helmuth's father shot himself in his office. Helmuth remembers that he saw his father's bloody uniform being burnt in the family fireplace.
Unbelievable trauma for a kid.
So traumatized was he by what he had overheard and what had happened, that he reacted by refusing to eat at home for the following 9 years.
Yeah.
He was afraid that his mother might poison him. Although Helmuth may not have realized all that it meant, his father had been a Nazi and a supporter of Adolf Hitler.
Which explains everything.
Many of you will know something about the Nazis and Hitler. You probably know of Hitler's determination to make Germany into a mighty power and his ambition of conquering all of Europe.
Mm-hmm.
You may have heard that he killed Jews, but Nazism was not one or two isolated acts. It was a system, a structure of ideas about the world and politics.
That's the key right there.
Let us try and understand what Nazism was all about. Let us see why Helmuth's father killed himself and what the basis of his fear was." End quote.
You know, that phrase near the end is really the thesis for everything we are about to discuss today.
The structure of ideas part.
Exactly. Nazism was not one or two isolated acts. It was a system, a structure of ideas. Because, we have this cinematic idea of evil as a chaotic mob running through the streets with torches.
Right, like cartoon villains.
Yeah, but the real terror of this era was its bureaucracy. It was a complete worldview that actively reshaped the courts, the schools, the military, and the autonomy around one central, horrifying philosophy.
And the guilt of participating in that system is exactly what drove Helmuth's father to suicide.
Precisely.
By the spring of 1945, the Allies, so that's the countries fighting against Germany, like the U.S., the U.K., and the Soviet Union, they were closing in.
Right, they were winning the war.
And the father explicitly names his victims. He says the crippled and Jews.
He knows exactly what he did.
He knew the system was collapsing and the bill was finally coming due. And the text immediately moves into the aftermath of that collapse. I'll read the next section.
Okay.
Quote, "In May 1945, Germany surrendered to the Allies. Anticipating what was coming, Hitler, his propaganda minister Goebbels, and his entire family committed suicide collectively in his Berlin bunker in April.
Hmm.
At the end of the war, an international military tribunal at Nuremberg was set up to prosecute Nazi war criminals for crimes against peace, for war crimes and crimes against humanity.
Right.
Germany's conduct during the war, especially those actions which came to be called crimes against humanity, raised serious moral and ethical questions and invited worldwide condemnation. What were these acts? End quote.
It's striking that the leaders at the very top took the exact same violent exit as Helmut's father.
It really is. They all knew what was coming.
Hmm.
But for the high-ranking officials who actually survived, we get this thing the text calls the International Military Tribunal at Nuremberg.
Yeah, the Nuremberg trials.
So what exactly is an international military tribunal? Because, before this, when a war ended, didn't the winners usually just, I don't know, shoot the losers or force them to sign a harsh treaty?
Well, historically, yes. The concept of, like, victor's justice was usually pretty swift and brutal. But the Allies realized that the sheer scale of the evil they had just uncovered required a completely new legal framework.
So they needed a massive worldwide court case.
Exactly. They set it up in the city of Nuremberg. They couldn't just execute people in the streets. They needed to put the ideology itself on trial for the entire world to see.
Right.
They actually had to invent new categories of international law to do it.
Which the text mentions.
Mhm.
Crimes against peace and crimes against humanity.
Right, so let's break those down. Crimes against peace basically meant aggressively starting a massive, completely unjustified war.
Okay, that makes sense.
But crimes against humanity was this revolutionary legal concept. It was created specifically to describe state-sponsored, widespread, systematic attacks on civilian population.
Wow.
The tribunal was humanity's attempt to draw a hard line and say there are some actions so depraved that they aren't just crimes against a specific nation, they are crimes against the very definition of what it means to be human.
That's powerful. And the text definitely doesn't shy away from detailing the horrific math of those actions.
Yeah.
Let's read the next part.
Let's do it.
Quote, under the shadow of the Second World War, Germany had waged a genocidal war, which resulted in the mass murder of selected groups of innocent civilians of Europe. The number of people killed included 6 million Jews, 200,000 Gypsies, 1 million Polish civilians, 70,000 Germans who were considered mentally and physically disabled, besides innumerable political opponents.
It's hard to even process those numbers.
Nazis devised an unprecedented means of killing people, that is, by gathering them in various killing centers like Auschwitz.
Right.
The Nuremberg Tribunal sentenced only 11 leading Nazis to death. Many others were imprisoned for life. The retribution did come, yet the punishment of the Nazis was far short of the brutality and extent of their crimes. End quote.
I feel like we have to stop here for a second and just look at the word genocidal war.
Yeah, let's define that.
It means the intentional, systematic destruction of entire groups of people. 6 million Jews, 1 million Polish civilians, 200,000 Romani people.
It's staggering.
We read these numbers in history books so often that they risk losing their impact, But think about the sheer mechanical scale of the logistics required to wage a genocidal war.
Right, this wasn't just a battlefield casualty count. The phrase that really jumps out to me is an unprecedented means of killing people.
Yes. Unprecedented.
Because the world had seen massacres and brutality for thousands of years, right?
Yeah.
But they had never seen murder treated like a factory assembly line.
Exactly. Building killing centers like Auschwitz, relying on train schedules, poison gas, and this cold, bureaucratic efficiency to exterminate human beings.
It was the modernization of mass murder.
Which really highlights a painful legal and moral paradox that the text points out at the end there.
About the punishment falling short.
Yeah. You just read the death toll of millions of innocent people. Yet at Nuremberg, only 11 leading Nazis were sentenced to death.
Wow. Only 11.
Right. How do you adequately punish a crime of that magnitude? The legal system is designed to handle individual murders, maybe a conspiracy. It is completely overwhelmed when an entire society mobilizes to commit genocide.
You can execute the architects,
Yeah.
but the punishment will always fall agonizingly short of the crimes.
Exactly.
So, to you listening, the inevitable question here is, how does a modern educated country get to the point where it builds death factories?
Right. How does it start?
To answer that, the text actually rewinds the clock. We are going back to the ashes of the First World War to witness the birth of a new government. Here's part 2.
Let's hear it.
Quote, In the early 20th century, fought the First World War, 1914 to 1918, alongside the Austrian Empire and against the Allies, England, France, and Russia.
Hmm.
All joined the war enthusiastically, hoping to gain from a quick victory. Little did they realize that the war would stretch on, eventually draining Europe of all its resources.
Right.
Germany made initial gains by occupying France and Belgium. However, the Allies, strengthened by the U.S. entry in 1917, won, defeating Germany and the Central Powers in November 1918.
Yeah.
The defeat of Imperial Germany and the abdication of the Emperor gave an opportunity to parliamentary parties to recast German polity.
Okay, let's pause.
A National Assembly met at Weimar and established a democratic constitution with a federal structure. Deputies were now elected to the German parliament, or Reichstag, on the basis of equal and universal votes cast by all adults, including women. End quote.
Okay, so let's establish the baseline here. It's 1918, Germany loses World War I, and the emperor abdicates.
Right, which basically means a king or emperor is quitting their job and fleeing, right?
Exactly. He steps down and runs away. So overnight, the country transforms from an empire ruled by a monarch into a democracy known as the Weimar Republic.
And the text says they established a federal structure and universal votes.
Yeah, and on paper, it was one of the most progressive democracies in the world at the time. A federal structure where power is shared, a parliament called the Reichstag, and universal voting rights that included women.
Suddenly, regular people had a say. But wait, if this new Weimar Republic was so incredibly progressive and gave everyone a voice, why did the German public almost immediately despise it?
It's a great question.
It seems completely backwards. If you just got the right to vote, shouldn't you support the government that gave it to you?
Well, it's a tragic paradox of history. Democracies often inherit the catastrophic messes created by the autocracies that came before them.
Ah, I see.
The new democratic politicians didn't start World War I, the emperor did, but the emperor ran away. So when the time came to surrender and face the consequences, it was the new democratic leaders who had to sign their names on the dotted line.
And those consequences were absolutely devastating, as the text is about to show us.
Oh, yeah. They were brutal.
Let me read the next part. Quote, "This republic, however, was not received well by its own people, largely because of the terms it was forced to accept after Germany's defeat at the end of the First World War.
Mm-hmm.
The peace treaty at Versailles with the Allies was a harsh and humiliating peace. Germany lost its overseas colonies, a tenth of its population, 13% of its territories, 75% of its iron, and 26% of its coal to France, Poland, Denmark, and Lithuania.
Just massive losses.
The Allied powers demilitarized Germany to weaken its power. The war guilt clause held Germany responsible for the war and damages the Allied countries suffered.
Right.
Germany was forced to pay compensation amounting to £6 billion. The Allied armies also occupied the resource-rich Rhineland for much of the 1920s. Many Germans held the new Weimar Republic responsible for not only the defeat in the war, but the disgrace at Versailles." End quote.
So we have to break down the Treaty of Versailles, because it wasn't just a peace treaty, it was a punishment.
Definitely. I want to put this £6 billion compensation and these losses into a modern, relatable analogy for you listening,
Yeah.
because the scale of this punishment is staggering.
Yeah, please do.
Imagine you work at a factory,
Yeah.
and the CEO drives the company to bankruptcy through illegal gambling, and then he just flees the country.
Right, he bails.
The bank takes over.
Yeah.
But they don't just fire you. They take 10% of your house. They confiscate 75% of your tools, so you can't even try to start a new business. They force you to sign a legal document admitting the entire bankruptcy was personally your fault. And then, on top of all that, they hand you a massive, multi-billion-dollar bill that you were expected to pay off.
You would be absolutely consumed by rage.
You'd be desperate. No wonder the citizens blamed their brand new democratic government for signing it.
Exactly. And the text mentions they were demilitarized, meaning their army was taken away, leaving them defenseless.
And the war guilt clause.
Making Germany take 100% of the blame for the war. It was a psychological wound.
And as you mentioned, the citizens didn't direct their rage at the vanished emperor. They directed it at the politicians who signed the paper. The text dives right into this immediate economic and psychological fallout next.
Let's read it.
Quote, 1.1 The effects of the war. The war had a devastating impact on the entire continent, both psychologically and financially. From a continent of creditors, Europe turned into one of debtors. Unfortunately, the infant Weimar Republic was being made to pay for the sins of the old empire. The Republic carried the burden of war guilt and national humiliation and was financially crippled by being forced to pay compensation.
Right.
Those who supported the Weimar Republic, mainly socialists, Catholics, and Democrats, became easy targets of attack in the conservative nationalist circles. They were mockingly called the November criminals.
There is.
This mindset had a major impact on the political developments of the early 1930s, as we will soon see. End quote.
Think about the shifting financial power here. The text uses the words creditors and debtors.
Let's clarify those real quick. Creditors are people who lend money out, right?
Right, and debtors are people who owe money. Before the war, Europe was the wealthy creditor of the world. But the war bankrupts them. Europe went broke. They become debtors, owing massive sums.
And the tragic irony here is that the infant Weimar Republic, this brand new democracy, was paying for the mistakes of the old emperor.
It's totally unfair. And inside Germany, this financial ruin becomes weaponized as a political insult. You see the phrase November criminals.
Yeah, why November?
Because the armistice, the surrender, was signed in November 1918. So if you were a socialist, a Catholic, or a Democrat trying to build this fragile new republic, you were blamed for signing the surrender.
You were branded as traitors.
Exactly. And that humiliation collided with a deeply traumatized culture.
Let's read how the describes that trauma. Quote, "The First World War left a deep imprint on European society and polity. Soldiers came to be placed above civilians. Politicians and publicists laid great stress on the need for men to be aggressive, strong, and masculine. The media glorified trench life.
Just wild.
The truth, however, was that soldiers lived miserable lives in these trenches, trapped with rats feeding on corpses. They faced poisonous gas and enemy shelling, and witnessed their ranks reduce rapidly. Aggressive war propaganda and national honor occupied center stage in the public sphere, while popular support grew for conservative dictatorships that had recently come into being. Democracy was indeed a young and fragile idea, which could not survive the instabilities of interwar Europe." End quote.
This paragraph highlights a massive cognitive dissonance in the society.
Yeah, the text contrasts the media glorification with the horrific reality of the trenches. I mean, rats feeding on corpses, poisonous gas. Why did society suddenly place soldiers above civilians and glorify this?
It's a mass psychological defense mechanism. When millions of young men die in the mud for a few yards of territory, a society cannot psychologically bear the idea that it was all for nothing.
So they have to make it mean something.
To cope, you have to elevate the soldier to a mythical sacred status. You rebrand the trauma as national honor. After a traumatizing war, society started worshiping toughness and aggression just to cope.
And the text mentions interwar Europe, meaning the highly stressful time between World War I and World War II.
Right. And the key takeaway for you listening is that when people crave strong, aggressive leadership to feel safe, democracy feels too weak and, as the text says, fragile.
So you have a traumatized, humiliated population and an economy on the brink. What happens when that collective trauma spills into the streets? The text takes us into the political radicalization of the 1920s next.
Let's get into part 3.
Quote, 1.2 Political Radicalism and Economic Crises. The birth of the Weimar Republic coincided with the revolutionary uprising of the Spartacist League on the pattern of the Bolshevik Revolution in Russia. Soviets of workers and sailors were established in many cities. The political atmosphere in Berlin was charged with demands for Soviet-style governance.
Right, a communist push.
Those opposed to this, such as the Socialists, Democrats, and Catholics, met in Weimar to give shape to the Democratic Republic. The Weimar Republic crushed the uprising with the help of a war veterans organization called Free Corps. The anguished Spartacists later founded the Communist Party of Germany. Communists and socialists henceforth became irreconcilable enemies and could not make common cause against Hitler. Both revolutionaries and militant nationalists craved for radical solutions. End quote.
So we can break this down into a simple street fight.
Yeah, who are the players here?
On one side, you have the communist revolutionaries, the Spartacist League. They watched the Bolsheviks successfully overthrow the Russian government, and they want a Russian-style revolution in Germany.
Okay. And on the other side?
On the other side, the New Democracy. But they don't have a strong military because of the treaty, right? So they had to hire tough right-wing war veterans, the Free Corps, to stop the communists.
And they crushed them.
Yeah.
Which leads to what might be the most crucial sentence in this entire section. Communists and socialists henceforth became irreconcilable enemies and could not make common cause against Hitler.
It's the fatal fracture. The groups that could have stopped Hitler hated each other too much to team up.
They were irreconcilable enemies because the moderate socialists basically sent right-wing veterans to murder the communist leaders in the streets.
Exactly. And while the political factions are busy fighting each other in the streets, the economy completely implodes.
Oh man, the economic part is wild. Let's read it.
Go ahead.
Quote, political radicalization was only heightened by the economic crisis of 1923. Germany had fought the war largely on loans and had to pay war reparations in gold.
Mm.
This depleted gold reserves at a time resources were scarce. In 1923, Germany refused to pay, and the French occupied its leading industrial area, Ruhr, to claim their coal.
Right.
Germany retaliated with passive resistance and printed paper currency recklessly. With too much printed money in circulation, the value of the German mark fell.
Here we go.
In April, the U.S. dollar was equal to 24,000 marks. In July, 353,000 marks. In August, 4,621,000 marks. And at 98,860,000 marks by December, the figure had run into trillions.
True.
As the value of the mark collapsed, prices of goods soared. The image of Germans carrying cartloads of currency notes to buy a loaf of bread was widely publicized, evoking worldwide sympathy. This crisis came to be known as hyperinflation, a situation when prices rise phenomenally high. End quote.
Let's track the domino effect here because it's a masterclass in economic catastrophe.
Well, first let's define deplete and reparation, like the text does. Deplete means to reduce or empty out, and reparation means paying to make up for a wrong done.
Perfect. So the dominoes. First, Germany owes gold, but they run out of gold. They deplete it.
Right.
Second, France says, well, if you can't pay in gold, we are invading your factories to take your coal instead.
And so Germany goes on strike passive resistance, and to pay the striking workers, they just print endless paper money.
Which destroys the core concept of money. Money becomes worthless.
I really want to emphasize the math to you listening. Explain hyperinflation by imagining a loaf of bread costing $2 in January and $1 trillion by December.
It's unfathomable. Money literally became cheaper than firewood. People were burning cash to stay warm.
The Americans eventually step in to temporarily stop the bleeding, but it sets a dangerous trap. Let's look at the next part.
Okay.
Quote, eventually the Americans intervened and bailed Germany out of the crisis by introducing the Dawes Plan, which reworked the terms of reparation to ease the financial burden on Germans. 1.3 the years of depression. The years between 1924 and 1928 saw some stability. Yet this was built on sand.
Built on sand.
German investments in industrial recovery were totally dependent on short-term loans, largely from the USA. This support was withdrawn when the Wall Street Exchange crashed in 1929.
Right.
Fearing a fall in prices, people made frantic efforts to sell their shares. On one single day, 24 October, 13 million shares were sold. This was the start of the Great Economic Depression. Over the next 3 years, between 1929 and 1932, the national income of the USA fell by half. Factories shut down, exports fell, farmers were badly hit, and speculators withdrew their money from the market. The effects of this recession in the U.S. economy were felt worldwide. End quote.
So why does the text say the stability was built on sand?
Right, because Germany hadn't actually fixed its internal economy, had they?
No, their recovery was entirely paid for by borrowed American money. So when the U.S. stock market on Wall Street crashed in 1929, the Americans panicked.
And they asked for their money back immediately.
Exactly, which collapsed the German economy instantly. And the human toll of that second collapse is what truly breaks the society.
Let's read about that human toll. Quote, the German economy was the worst hit by the economic crisis. By 1932, industrial production was reduced to 40% of the 1929 level.
Wow.
Workers lost their jobs or were paid reduced wages. The number of unemployed touched an unprecedented 6 million. On the streets of Germany, you could see men with placards around their necks saying, willing to do any work.
Just total desperation.
Unemployed youths played cards or simply sat at street corners or desperately queued up at the local employment exchange.
Yeah.
As jobs disappeared, the youth took to criminal activities and total despair became commonplace.
Right.
The economic crisis created deep anxieties and fears in people. The middle classes, especially salaried employees and pensioners, saw their savings diminish when the currency lost its value. Small businessmen, the self-employed and retailers, suffered as their businesses got ruined. These sections of society were filled with the fear of proletarianization and anxiety of being reduced to the ranks of the working class, or worse still, the unemployed. End quote.
We need to define that word the text uses. Proletarianization.
It's a big word. It basically means becoming impoverished down to the level of the struggling working class.
Exactly. It's a primal fear. Paint the picture in your mind. Total despair. 6 million unemployed.
Middle-class people whose entire life savings just vanished.
Right. Men walking the streets with signs begging for any kind of manual labor to feed their kids. Fear like that makes societies incredibly desperate.
And unfortunately, the government was fundamentally broken and couldn't help. Let's read the next section about the Weimar Republic's political flaws.
Let's hear it.
Quote, only organized workers could manage to keep their heads above water, but unemployment weakened their bargaining power. Big business was in crisis. The large mass of peasantry was affected by a sharp fall in agricultural prices, and women, unable to fill their children's stomachs, were filled with a sense of deep despair.
Just grim.
Politically, too, the Weimar Republic was fragile. The Weimar Constitution had some inherent defects, which made it unstable and vulnerable to dictatorship.
Listen closely to this part.
One was proportional representation. This made achieving a majority by any one party a near impossible task, leading to a rule by coalitions. Another defect was Article 48, which gave the president the powers to impose emergency, suspend civil rights, and rule by decree. Within its short life, the Weimar Republic saw 20 different cabinets lasting on an average 239 days, and a liberal use of Article 48. Yet the crisis could not be managed. People lost confidence in the democratic parliamentary system, which seemed to offer no solutions. End quote.
Okay, we need to explain the two fatal flaws of the Weimar Constitution in simple terms, because this is how the architecture of democracy actually fails.
Let's start with the first one, proportional representation.
Right. It meant there were too many tiny political parties, so no one could ever get a majority, meaning no one could ever agree on anything.
They had to form these messy coalitions, and the government kept collapsing. 20 different cabinets.
Yeah, exactly. And the second defect was Article 48.
Yeah, let's break that down. It's an emergency loophole, right?
Yes. It allowed the president to become a temporary dictator, ignore civil rights, and just pass laws by himself in an emergency.
I always like to compare Article 48 to a self-destruct button installed in a brand new house. It was meant for emergencies, but it ended up destroying the democracy from the inside out because people just lost faith in the whole system.
That's a great analogy. The population is starving, traumatized, and completely disillusioned. The vacuum is perfectly primed.
Which brings us to part 4, Hitler's rise to power. Let's look at the biography of the man who fills that vacuum.
Right.
Quote, to Hitler's rise to power. This crisis in the economy, polity, and society formed the background to Hitler's rise to power. Born in 1889 in Austria, Hitler spent his youth in poverty. When the First World War broke out, he enrolled for the army, acted as a messenger in the front, became a corporal, and earned medals for bravery.
Okay.
The German defeat horrified him, and the Versailles Treaty made him furious. In 1919, he joined a small group called the German Workers' Party. He subsequently took over the organization and renamed it the National Socialist German Workers' Party. This party came to be known as the Nazi Party, end quote.
So, just summarizing this quick biography, it's remarkably unremarkable.
Yeah, he wasn't even born in Germany. He was an Austrian corporal, furious about the World War I loss, who basically took over a tiny fringe political party and rebranded it as the Nazi Party.
Right. And his rise was definitely not an overnight success. Let's look at the timelines.
Okay, I'll read the next part. Quote, in 1923, Hitler planned to seize control of Bavaria, march to Berlin, and capture power. He failed, was arrested, tried for treason, and later released. The Nazis could not effectively mobilize popular support till the early 1930s. It was during the Great Depression that Nazism became a mass movement. As we have seen, after 1929, banks collapsed and businesses shut down, workers lost their jobs, and the middle classes were threatened with destitution.
Right.
In such a situation, Nazi propaganda stirred hopes of a better future. In 1928, the Nazi Party got no more than 2.6% votes in the Reichstag, the German parliament. By 1932, it had become the largest party with 37% votes, end quote.
Okay, we need to define propaganda as the text uses it. It's a specific type of message directly aimed at influencing the opinion of people through posters, films, speeches, and things like that.
Right. But we have to point out the crazy math to the listener here. Look at those numbers. From a tiny 2.6% fringe group in 1928 to 37%, the largest party in just 4 years.
It's an insane jump. Why? Because the Great Depression made people desperate. Extremism thrives on desperation. The Nazis promised a way out when everyone else was just arguing in Parliament.
And Hitler capitalized on that hunger with a completely new style of political manipulation. Let's read about his tactics.
Go for it.
Quote, Hitler was a powerful speaker. His passion and his words moved people. He promised to build a strong nation, undo the injustice of the Versailles Treaty, and restore the dignity of the German people. He promised employment for those looking for work and a secure future for the youth. He promised to weed out all foreign influences and resist all foreign conspiracies against Germany.
Classic scapegoating.
Hitler devised a new style of politics. He understood the significance of rituals and spectacle in mass mobilization. Nazis held massive rallies and public meetings to demonstrate the support for Hitler and instill a sense of unity among the people.
Right.
The red banners with the swastika, the Nazi salute, and the ritualized rounds of applause after the speeches were all part of this spectacle of power.
Wow.
Nazi propaganda skillfully projected Hitler as a messiah, a savior, as someone who had arrived to deliver people from their distress. It is an image that captured the imagination of a people whose sense of dignity and pride had been shattered and who were living in a time of acute economic and political crises." End quote.
The text talks about the spectacle of power and projecting him as a messiah.
Yeah, how does that change the way people vote? It sounds more like a cult than a political campaign.
Because he didn't just offer political policies, he offered an emotional performance. The massive rallies, the banners, the salutes, it was all designed to make a broken, humiliated people feel powerful and unified again.
He gave them an identity.
Exactly. And once he captured their imagination, he moved to capture the government.
Let's read how he actually did it. Quote, 2.1 The Destruction of Democracy. On 30 January 1933, President Hindenburg offered the chancellorship, the highest position in the cabinet of ministers, to Hitler. By now, the Nazis had managed to rally the conservatives to their cause. Having acquired power, Hitler set out to dismantle the structures of democratic rule.
Here comes.
A mysterious fire that broke out in the German Parliament building in February facilitated his move. The fire decree of 28 February 1933 indefinitely suspended civic rights, like freedom of speech, press, and assembly, that had been guaranteed by the Weimar Constitution.
Unbelievable.
Then he turned on his arch-enemies, the communists, most of whom were hurriedly packed off to the newly established concentration camps. The repression of the communists was severe. Out of the surviving 6,808 arrest files of Dusseldorf, a small city of 500,000 population, 1,440 were those of communists alone. They were, however, only one among the 52 types of victims persecuted by the Nazis across the country. End quote.
Let's define concentration camp really quickly. It's a camp where people were isolated and detained without due process of law.
No lawyers, no judges.
Right, and I want to walk you through this rapid timeline because it's terrifying. He is legally appointed chancellor.
Right, he didn't overthrow the government to get the job.
Exactly. A month later, the parliament building catches fire. Hitler uses this crisis to pass a fire decree to cancel freedom of speech and lock up his political rivals, the communists. Democracy was being torn down legally from the inside.
And then comes the final blow. Let's read it.
Okay.
Quote, on the night of March 1933, the famous Enabling Act was passed. This act established dictatorship in Germany. It gave Hitler all powers to sideline parliament and rule by decree.
There it is.
All political parties and trade unions were banned, except for the Nazi Party and its affiliates. The state established complete control over the economy, media, army, and judiciary.
Total control.
Special surveillance and security forces were created to control and order society in ways that the Nazis wanted. Apart from the already existing regular police in green uniform and the SA, or the stormtroopers, these included the Gestapo, secret state police, the SS, the protection squads, criminal police, and the security service, SD.
That alphabet soup of police forces.
It was the extra-constitutional powers of these newly organized forces that gave the Nazi state its reputation as the most dreaded criminal state. People could now be detained in Gestapo torture chambers, rounded up and sent to concentration camps, deported at will, or arrested without any legal procedures. The police forces acquired powers to rule with impunity. End quote.
So we have to break down this Enabling Act.
Yeah, this was the moment the democracy officially died, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Hitler could now just make laws by himself.
Exactly. And the terrifying part is the police state he creates. The Gestapo, the SS, the SD. The text says they ruled with impunity.
What does that mean for the average person?
It means the secret police could do whatever they wanted to whoever they wanted, and they could never be punished by a court. Total exemption from the law.
Wow. So democracy is dead. What do they do with this absolute power? Part 5 details the road to war.
Let's get into it.
Quote, 2.2 Reconstruction. Hitler assigned the responsibility of economic recovery to the economist Hjalmar Schacht, who aimed at full production and full employment through a state-funded work creation program.
Hmm.
This project produced the famous German superhighways and the people's car, the Volkswagen. In foreign policy also, Hitler acquired quick successes.
Right.
He pulled out of the League of Nations in 1933, reoccupied the Rhineland in 1936, and integrated Austria and Germany in 1938 under the slogan, "One people, one empire, and one leader."
Moving fast.
He then went on to wrest German-speaking Sudetenland from Czechoslovakia and gobbled up the entire country. In all of this, he had the unspoken support of England, which had considered the Versailles verdict too harsh. These quick successes at home and abroad seemed to reverse the destiny of the country. End quote.
So at first, things looked like they were getting better for the average citizen. Massive state projects like the highways, the Volkswagen, which literally means the people's car,
They had jobs again.
right? And internationally, Hitler started aggressively taking over neighboring territories, and countries like England looked the other way because they still felt guilty about the harsh World War I treaties.
But the economic miracle was actually a trap.
Okay.
Read the next part.
Okay, unquote.
Hitler did not stop here. Schacht had advised Hitler against investing hugely in rearmament as the state still ran on deficit financing.
Mm-hmm.
Cautious people, however, had no place in Nazi Germany. Schacht had to leave. Hitler chose war as the way out of the approaching economic crisis. Resources were to be accumulated through expansion of territory. In September 1939, Germany invaded Poland. This started a war with France and England.
The start of World War II.
In September 1940, a tripartite pact was signed between Germany, Italy, and Japan, strengthening Hitler's claim to international power. Puppet regimes, supportive of Nazi Germany, were installed in a large part of Europe. By the end of 1940, Hitler was at the pinnacle of his power. End quote.
So we see the phrase deficit financing.
Yeah, it's like maxing out all your credit cards just to buy weapons. The economist, Schacht, warned against it, so he was fired. The only way to pay off the massive debt was to conquer neighbors and steal their resources.
Exactly, and the timeline is clear. Invading Poland in 1939 triggered World War II. The Tripartite Pact formalized the alliance with Italy and Japan. Hitler was at his peak.
But then he makes a fatal error.
Let's read about it.
Quote, Hitler now moved to achieve his long-term aim of conquering Eastern Europe. He wanted to ensure food supplies and living space for Germans. He attacked the Soviet Union in June 1941. In this historic blunder, Hitler exposed the German Western Front to British aerial bombing and the Eastern Front to the powerful Soviet armies.
Right, a two-front war.
The Soviet Red Army inflicted a crushing and humiliating defeat on Germany at Stalingrad. After this, the Soviet Red Army hounded out the retreating German soldiers until they reached the heart of Berlin, establishing Soviet hegemony over the entire Eastern Europe, dropping of the atom bomb on Hiroshima in Japan.
Wow.
From this brief account of what happened in the Second World War, we now return to Helmuth and his father's story, a story of Nazi criminality during the war, end quote.
So the text calls attacking the Soviet Union a historic blunder.
Yeah, he opened a war on two fronts, leading to the massive defeat at Stalingrad.
Right, but notice how the text shifts here. It connects this broad military overview back to the human element. We're shifting from the battlefields to the ideology. Why were Helmuth's father and the Nazis committing these crimes?
Let's dive into that ideology. Right. Quote 3. The Nazi worldview. The crimes that Nazis committed were linked to a system of belief and a set of practices. Nazi ideology was synonymous with Hitler's worldview. According to this, there was no equality between people, but only a racial hierarchy finest, and to retain its purity, become stronger, and dominate the world.
Right.
The other aspect of Hitler's ideology related to the geopolitical concept of Lebensraum, or living space. He believed that new territories had to be acquired for settlement.
Listen to this.
This would enhance the area of the mother country, while enabling the settlers on new lands to retain an intimate link with the place of their origin. It would also enhance the material resources and power of the German nation. Hitler intended to extend German boundaries by moving eastwards, to concentrate all Germans geographically in one place. Poland became the laboratory for this experimentation, end quote.
We really need to clearly define this word, Lebensraum, living space.
It's the core twisted logic, isn't it?
Yes. They believed humans weren't equal, but ranked by race. To make the superior race stronger, they needed more land Lebensraum to grow food and live. So they decided to steal Eastern Europe, like Poland, and use it as a laboratory for this dark experiment.
The text asks the reader to analyze two quotes from Hitler himself that prove this. Let me read them.
Okay.
Quote, Source A. For this earth is not allotted to anyone, nor is it presented to anyone as a gift. It is awarded by providence to people who in their hearts have the courage to conquer it, the strength to preserve it, and the industry to put it to the plow.
Mm-hmm.
The primary right of this world is the right to life, so far as one possesses the strength for this. Hence, on the basis of this right, a vigorous nation will always find ways of adapting its territory to its population size. Hitler, Secret Book.
Right.
Source B. In an era when the earth is gradually being divided up among states, we cannot speak of a world power in connection with a formation whose political mother country is limited to the absurd area of 500 kilometers. Hitler, Mein Kampf, end quote.
So what do these quotes tell us?
I mean, Hitler's worldview was basically just might makes right. If you are strong enough to take land, it belongs to you. It's just a justification for endless imperialism and violence.
Exactly. And Part 6 shows us what happens when they apply that logic internally.
Let's read about the racial state. Quote, 3.1 Establishment of the racial state. Once in power, the Nazis quickly began to implement their dream of creating an exclusive racial community of pure Germans by physically eliminating all those who were seen as undesirable in the extended empire.
Mm-hmm.
Nazis wanted only a society of pure and healthy Nordic Aryans. They alone were considered desirable, only they were seen as worthy of prospering and multiplying against all others who were classed as undesirable.
Right.
This meant that even those Germans who were seen as impure or abnormal had no right to exist. Under the euthanasia program, Helmut's father, along with other Nazi officials, had condemned to death many Germans who were considered mentally or physically unfit, end quote.
The text defines Nordic German Aryans as a branch of people who lived in North European countries and had German or related origin.
Right, but we have to connect this back to the very first story. This is why Helmut's father killed himself.
Exactly. Helmut's father participated in the euthanasia program, which was the systematic murder of their own German citizens who had physical or mental disabilities because the Nazis deemed them unfit for their pure society.
It's just horrific, and they twisted language to justify it. Look at this next fragment.
Okay.
Quote, punishment of those belonging to a group or religion. Usurers, end quote.
The text provides a brief definition of usurers there. It means moneylenders charging excessive interest.
But it was often used as an anti-Semitic term of abuse. It's crazy how language is being twisted to criminalize and punish specific groups of people.
And when they applied this to Poland, it was devastating.
Let's read it. Quote, cattle in the other part called the general government, the destination of all undesirables of the empire. Members of the Polish intelligentsia were murdered in large numbers in order to keep the entire people intellectually and spiritually servile. Polish children who looked like Aryans were forcibly snatched from their mothers, end quote.
Let's explain what happened to Poland here. It was basically chopped up.
Yeah, the general government became a dumping ground for anyone the Nazis didn't want.
And look at the chilling strategy of murdering the intelligentsia. The teachers, the leaders, the smart people. They did that so the rest of the population would be easy to enslave.
And the horror of kidnapping children just because they happen to have blonde hair and blue eyes, taking them to be raised by Germans.
It's sickening. But inside Germany, the Holocaust started legally.
Right, the Nuremberg laws. Let's read them. Quote, Stage 1, exclusion, 1933-1939. You have no right to live among us as citizens. The Nuremberg laws of citizenship of September 1935. 1. Only persons of German or related blood would henceforth be German citizens enjoying the protection of the German Empire. 2. Marriages between Jews and Germans were forbidden. 3. Extramarital relations between Jews and Germans became a crime. 4. Jews were forbidden to fly the national flag.
Right.
Other legal measures included synagogues, place of worship for people of Jewish faith, were boycotted, end quote.
Let's break down those Nuremberg laws.
Yeah, notice how the Holocaust didn't start with death camps. It started with legal paperwork.
Exactly. Stripping away citizenship, dictating who could marry who, and banning people from national symbols. It was the legal erasure of a people.
And to make sure this system lasted, they went after the kids. Let's read this section on youth.
Please do.
Quote, activity. Hitler was fanatically interested in the youth of the country. He felt that a strong Nazi society could be established only by teaching children Nazi ideology. This required a control over the child both inside and outside school, what happened in schools under Nazism. All schools were cleansed and purified. This meant that teachers who were Jews or seen as politically unreliable were dismissed. Children were first segregated. Germans and Jews could not sit together or play together Hitler.
Just driving a wedge right away.
Even the function of sports was to nurture a spirit of violence and aggression among children. Hitler believed that boxing could make children iron-hearted, strong, and masculine.
Wow.
Youth organizations were made responsible for educating German youth in the spirit of National Socialism. 10-year-olds had to enter young folk. At 14, all boys had to join the Nazi youth organization Hitler Youth, where they learned to worship war, glorify aggression and violence, condemn democracy, and hate Jews, communists, gypsies, end quote.
The indoctrination of children is it's so methodical.
Right. The state fired teachers who didn't line with them. They separated the children. They even weaponized sports like boxing to make kids aggressive.
Explain the pipeline there. At 10, you join the Young Volk, and at 14, the Hitler Youth, to learn to hate democracy and minority groups.
And look at this next quote about how total their control was. Quote, "And get over. We don't let go of anyone. The Labor Front takes hold of them and keeps hold until they go to the grave, whether they like it or not."
It's like a cult.
It really is.
Yeah.
Source C. All boys between the ages of 6 and 10 went through a preliminary training in Nazi ideology.
Mm.
At the end of the training, they had to take the following oath of loyalty to Hitler. "In the presence of this blood banner, which represents our Führer, I swear to devote all my energies and my strength to the savior of our country, Adolf Hitler. I am willing and ready to give my life," end quote.
From age 6 to the grave, the state owned you. You didn't swear an oath to your country or a constitution. You swore an oath to one specific man, Adolf Hitler.
And to keep the adults in line, they used propaganda and completely twisted the language. Let's read this part about the art of propaganda.
Let's hear it.
Quote, "Civic honor as well as their husbands and families for this criminal offense." 4.2. The art of propaganda. The Nazi regime used language and media with care and often to great effect. The terms they coined to describe their various practices are not only deceptive, they're chilling. Nazis never used the words kill or murder in their official communications.
Listen to this.
Mass killings were termed special treatment, final solution for the Jews, euthanasia for the disabled, selection and disinfections. Evacuation meant deporting people to gas chambers.
It's so dark.
Do you know what the gas chambers were called? They were labeled disinfection areas and looked like bathrooms equipped with fake shower heads, end quote.
We have to analyze the terrifying use of language here. Using bureaucratic, clinical words like special treatment or disinfection allowed people to commit horrific murders without facing the reality of what they were doing.
Right. It was psychological manipulation of both the victims and the executioners.
Exactly. And they used media to constantly reinforce this.
Let's read the rest of the media section.
Yeah.
Quote, "Media was carefully used to win support for the regime and popularize its worldview. Nazi ideas were spread through visual images, films, radio, posters, catchy slogans, and leaflets. In posters, groups identified as the enemies of Germans were stereotyped, mocked, abused, and described as evil. Socialists and liberals were National Socialism." From a Nazi leaflet, 1932, end quote.
It was a complete multimedia assault.
Radio, films, catchy slogans, they constantly pumped out stereotypes to make the public view certain people as less than human.
Which brings us to the biggest question. How could ordinary people let this happen? Part 7 talks about the silence of ordinary people.
Let's read box 1. Quote, Box 1. How did the common people react to Nazism? Many saw the world through Nazi eyes and spoke their mind in Nazi language. They felt hatred and anger surge inside them when they saw someone who looked like a Jew. They marked the houses of Jews and reported suspicious neighbors. They genuinely believed Nazism would bring prosperity and improve general well-being.
Right.
But not every German was a Nazi. Many organized active resistance to Nazism, braving police repression and death. The large majority of Germans, however, were passive onlookers and apathetic witnesses.
This is the critical part.
They were too scared to act, to differ, to protest. They preferred to look away. Pastor Neumiller, a resistance fighter, observed an absence of protest, an uncanny silence, amongst ordinary Germans in the face of brutal and organized crimes committed against people in the Nazi Empire.
Wow.
He wrote movingly about this silence. First, they came for the communists. Well, I was not a communist, so I said nothing. Then they came for the Social Democrats, end quote.
We have to address the text's explanation directly. Some were true believers who bought the propaganda. Some actively fought back and risked death. but the vast majority were apathetic witnesses.
Just looked away because they were terrified.
Yes, Pastor Niemöller's famous poem warns about the danger of staying silent when others are persecuted until there is no one left to speak up for you.
And eventually the truth of what was happening in that silence came out. Let's read the final section.
Okay.
Quote, 5.1 Knowledge about the Holocaust. Information about Nazi practices had trickled out of Germany during the last years of the regime. But it was only after the war ended and Germany was defeated that the world came to realize the horrors of what had happened. While the Germans were preoccupied with their own plight as a defeated nation emerging out of the rubble, the Jews wanted the world to remember the atrocities and sufferings they had endured during the Nazi killing operations, also called the Holocaust.
Right.
At its height, a ghetto inhabitant had said to another that he wanted to outlive the war just for half an hour. Presumably, he meant that he wanted to be able to tell the world about what had happened in Nazi Germany.
Just half an hour.
This indomitable spirit to bear witness and to preserve the documents can be seen in many ghetto and camp inhabitants who wrote diaries, kept notebooks, and created archives.
Wow.
On the other hand, when the war seemed lost, the Nazi leadership distributed petrol to its functionaries to destroy all incriminating evidence, end quote.
Explain the deep desire of the victims to bear witness here.
I mean, the quote about wanting to survive just half an hour past the war, just long enough to ensure the truth was told, it's incredibly moving.
Contrast that immense bravery with the cowardice of the Nazi leadership, handing out gasoline at the end to burn the evidence of what they had done. They knew it was wrong.
They absolutely knew, and the text ends with some activities and dates for students. Let me just summarize this last bit. Questions, activities. 1. Write a one-page history of Germany as a schoolchild, a Jewish survivor, or a political opponent. 2. Imagine that you are Helmuth. Write a paragraph on what you would say to your father. And it asks the reader to describe the problems of the Weimar Republic, why Nazism became popular, and why propaganda was effective.
Note how the text brings us full circle right back to Helmuth, the boy in the woods from the very beginning.
Yeah, let's synthesize the massive journey we just took you on today.
We traced a direct line. The trauma of World War I leading to economic collapse.
Right, people losing faith in democracy entirely.
Then a charismatic leader using propaganda and legal loopholes to take power.
The creation of a racial state, the indoctrination of youth, and ultimately, the Holocaust.
Which leaves us with a thought-provoking question to mull over. The text noted that democracy was a fragile idea that couldn't survive economic instability.
Yeah, when people feel economically desperate and lose faith in their institutions, how vulnerable are any of us to the spectacle of a charismatic leader promising easy answers?
It's a chilling reminder of why history like this must be read, understood, and never forgotten.
Thank you so much for sticking with this heavy but deeply necessary deep dive today. Take care, everyone.